Hey everybody, good afternoon. I know people are coming in from that keynote. Um, that went over a little bit. I had to leave it a little early while Kelsey was dropping some gems. Um, yeah, I know people are still coming. All right, but yeah, let me make sure. I'll start here in the next minute or so, just to make sure if there are any questions that we have time um, to go through them. But yeah, if you want to put in the chat, you know, what you do, who you are, LinkedIn, links to connect, feel free. I posted mine in the session chat there at the top, so happy to connect with anyone here. But yeah, I'm really excited to be here at BitCon. I'm excited to, have this opportunity to share with all of you. A lot of this is part of this is about my personal story as as to how I got into tech, and then really how, as I've been in engineering leadership, how that makes me look at how I build teams. And so I'm happy to take any questions along the way. It doesn't have to be a thing where you wait till the end to chat, your questions in. So if you want to throw them in the chat or the Q&A, whether throughout the presentation or at the end, I'll make sure that I get to it. Um, but yeah, again, just excited to be here. Excited to be, especially a part of this virtual conference because I got a little bit of a scratchy throat. So sorry if you can all hear that in my voice. But yeah, I guess we'll just get started. So yeah, I'm Ivan Herndon. Uh, Currently, I'm the VP of Engineering at Branch Insurance. And today I want to talk to you about going from apprentice to VP and how I like to build teams by growing developers. And so I'm from Detroit, but Detroit born and raised. Right now I live in a suburb that's very close to Detroit. And so what you see here is just a image of the downtown Detroit skyline. And yeah, I started in tech about 10 years ago, or a little more. It's been more than 10 years now. But like not 11 full years, so a little over 10 years ago. And I just want to share my story into, how I started kind of on the outside of tech, and now how that has me helping to build the kind of teams um, that I always wanted, especially wanted to see when I first got into tech, and the teams that I struggled to get into. And sometimes when you can't find that talent that you're looking for, it's a good idea to think about ways that you can build it. And so, one of the problems that we faced at Branch was we had a thin talent pipeline. And so we had roles open and budget available, but we still struggled to hire. And now, at the time when I came on board, we had already had a uh, program in place, kind of like a V1 of an apprenticeship program. And it was called Boot Camp to Dev. And this was where we looked and partnered with existing boot camps that had students who had graduated, and we put them through, um, about a month time where they got paid a stipend and learned our tech stack. And then we had them take our technical assessment. And then, if they did well, we offered them employment. If they didn't, it would be just kind of like any other interview. Because what we found was that the boot camps were teaching a lot of what we did in our stack, but not everything. And so we wanted to give that time like as a bridge over from the end of the boot camp to the beginning of working with our very real development team. We wanted to give a bridge from point A to point B, and that was that boot camp to dev program. And so we wanted people who could collaborate and grow, um, who could work well in our tech stack, and who would fit well into our culture. And we found, even from my experience personally, as to how I got into tech, but even some of the engineers that were on the team beforehand, that the engineers that meshed better with the team culture were those who came from like non-traditional backgrounds. So not necessarily having a CS degree, working in other fields before working in the tech, and just having kind of a broader set of experiences. And so, I spoke a little bit about this, or hinted at it earlier, but my journey, definitely not the traditional pathway to tech. I started out in, I wouldn't say I started out in retail. That wasn't my first job, but I had many other positions before I got into tech. I worked at T-Mobile as a, you know, retail store associate. I did business to business sales for T-Mobile. I worked administrative positions. I worked in real estate positions, sales positions, just different positions that uh, kind of crossed over a wide variety of categories. And nothing really, spoke to me as something that I felt like was a calling or a career. Nothing that really, um, felt like it was giving me any purpose in terms of my working life. And so there's this apprenticeship program that I found out about, like I said, a little over 10 years ago. And I applied to that. And that apprenticeship program allowed me to learn how to do software development. It was guided learning, but a lot of like on your own and self paced learning. And I knew that I always like to problem solve, and be challenged by solving complex problems. And so that fit really well into the apprenticeship program and to learn that software development. And so what language we were learning was JavaScript. And at the time, we were learning the front end framework, Angular, Angular 1. Um, so again, this was a little over 10 years ago, and that was a popular framework that was out at the time. And so even though I didn't go to school for computer science or have a fancy resume, I did find that I had a knack for problem solving and being able to understand the concepts and everything that we had learned in the apprenticeship. And, I have to say the experience really changed my life. It let me, or allowed me to rethink, what did the potential look like for my career? Because before that, I'd never been interested in computer science at all. I'd always done well, in math and science as a child, but it just wasn't a field that I saw any representation in. When I was in high school, when I was in college, all the people that were in computer science did not look like me, were interested in things that were very different. And that was probably just a limiting belief on my part, maybe as to why I never like dug deeper and really considered it. But definitely something that was very real when you're thinking about, okay, what do I want to go to school for? What do I want to participate in? It's always good when you can have, groups that have some familiarity to you. And for me, where I was in those groups, they just weren't very familiar for me. And so bringing us back to how we've built teams at Branch, our first experiment was that boot camp to dev program again. And so we had this short time where we would consider you an intern, like I said, that bridge kind of category. And then you start to do, learn our stack. We let you work on some small tickets, and then after you pass our technical assessment, we will hire you in full time. And so this was great as a first attempt. We had people that we hired, and this would have been probably now 4 years ago for this V1 that we did, that are still there and that have grown, in skill set, and in their level. And it was great to be able to tap into the existing bootcamp ecosystem, and grab people who were, had just been learning and eager to still learn more. And, you know, like I said, if it went well, we would hire them. It was kind of informal in terms of we didn't have at branch any control over necessarily what they learned in the boot camp, but we had all of the control of the resources that we gave them for that their participation in the bridge program. And even though it was informal, we did see real growth. And so we were able to see that we had a lot of people come on board. We've had high retention numbers from this program. And even the people that we had mentoring at the time have continued to mentor those devs that came through the program. And those devs are now even able to mentor some of our more junior devs that we have now. And so, what were some of the lessons that we've learned from our first version of this program? Um, we saw what worked. So, the big thing that worked that I noticed was the real world experience. A lot of times, and I think even Kelsey talked about it in his keynote, but he talked about it a little in a slightly different way. His was um, he was saying that when you always work in the existing code base, you never have to start something from scratch and be alone. That's how you know like how deep that you go. One of the things that we found when people come for boot camp is that all their experience is building something from scratch. That's like generally pretty small in scale, and one of the things that they struggled with initially was jumping into a code base that was existing. And this wasn't necessarily because the code was so much harder than what they're used to, but you have to get used to the different design systems, the different style guides, the way that people are writing the code. You have to get used to the review process. And then, really, depending on what your team is doing, which will probably be some version of an agile process, you have to get used to the processes also. And so that real world experience, especially being able to do some of it during that bridge program, helped out when we brought people on full time. Um, yeah, I would say the mentorship was another big thing. Again, when we first started, it wasn't like a formal. You have to spend X amount of time with uh, each developer that's coming through the program, but we had a Slack channel that we built just to make sure that questions could flow easily and get answered from the people that are on the dev team, and set up ad hoc meetings because we are a remote first company, and so we're really good at asynchronous communication. And in this way, we could also, train these newer developers to be good at asynchronous communication in real time, working on real world issues. And I mentioned already that we had strong retention rates, as we have developers that went through that program that are still with us today. And so, what some of the things that didn't work out so well for us is we didn't really have a real structure. Like I said, it was a very loose structure. It did work for us based on the devs that we had were very good at being able to help and mentor and want to do that. But there wasn't necessarily a structure set up for that to succeed. And so we kind of got lucky in that way that the mentorship had worked so well. We also had limited scalability. Mostly that was based on the way that we were bringing in candidates, which was looking at different boot camps in the area and their graduates. And then also, they could have varying understanding of our tech stack because, again, we weren't in control of their curriculum. And so we were providing everybody with the same resources to get them more up to date on our stack. And just if there's any technical people here, just so you know, our stack is a pretty modern stack. It's like JavaScript and TypeScript throughout the full stack. So front end React, JavaScript and TypeScript. We use serverless, but we're using Node and TypeScript on the back end. And what we found, a lot of the boot camps that people were coming from, they weren't not doing JavaScript on the back end. So that was one thing. And then we also use GraphQL, and a lot of them weren't using GraphQL. So those are the biggest things that people were learning after they graduated the boot camp, but before we brought them on as employees. And then there's always a risk of burnout, I found, especially for people who you expect to mentor a lot, if it's not an official part of their position. And so what we were doing, we were asking developers to mentor kind of in their spare time, um, along the way. And because that mentorship wasn't really structured, they could get questions anytime throughout their day. And so we just kind of left it up to the developers to manage that relationship and manage the amount of time and how they put time into it. And like I said, it worked well enough. We kind of got lucky there. But we saw from this first version that we could have more structure in that area. And so, what did we want to do when we wanted to build our own apprenticeship program? Um, well, we figured that it would be important if we were in control of the curriculum from day one. So for us, like I said, we were doing JavaScript across the full stack. It didn't really make much sense to spend a lot of time learning Ruby or learning any other languages because we're not using that in a day-to-day basis. So why don't we tailor the curriculum to exactly our workflow? Also, in addition to just the curriculum, we tailored the assignments to work how they do in our processes. So the way that we use GitHub, the way that we use our project management software, the way that we do code reviews, all of that was built into the learning process so that when people came on board, they had experience not just with code that's similar to what they'll see in you know, our real production repo, but they'll also have experience with the processes that we go through on a day-to-day basis. Um, so we wanted them to build real things. Of course, at the beginning, you're starting off building Hello World, building specific projects, but every project assignment that we gave them tied into a particular way that we were building our software. And so, we started them to work with serverless before the end of the training program so that they could build the same way that we do in AWS. We made sure that we had mentors who had time that was slotted to help them out throughout the program so that it wasn't an afterthought and didn't just feel like extra work, but a part of what they wanted to do, um, in terms of their actual work assignment, but also making mentorship a part of our team's culture. Because outside of even the apprenticeship program, we did want to foster a mentorship culture where more senior devs were always open to help out the more junior devs, whether it was helping with technical decision making, answering questions, doing check-ins, and things like that. Um, then during the part of the program where we brought them on as interns, um, we started them on as interns so that they could work fully in our code base and with our processes. This was a paid internship also. And so they came in and began to be a part of the team. And during this time, they had check ins with myself as the leader of the team, but also whoever the mentor was with them. And so they would get feedback that was often, usually once a week with their mentor. They were having one-on-ones or check-ins, and with me every 2 weeks or every month. So they would always get feedback into how they're doing, how they can improve, what they can work on to get better. Because the idea was that we wanted everybody that we brought on as an intern, we wanted to turn them into full-time employees. And one thing that I've learned, and this was through this apprenticeship program, and even through my time, which I realize now I didn't go over all of my background earlier on. I'll do it now as a quick aside. But um, when I first went through the apprenticeship program that I was in, I first started working at GM, working in the infotainment system. So we were building JavaScript apps in the dashboard infotainment systems, and built out like App Store, audiobooks app. I think I worked on a Weather Channel app. And while I was working there at my first job, there was a boot camp that was essentially down the street from where I went to the apprenticeship program. And I went down there and asked if they needed help doing any teaching or instructing. And that turned out to me doing like being a teacher's assistant, and then ultimately teaching boot camps, like part-time boot camps that happened in the evening, so after work, for about 5 years. And so I had brought that experience from being in an apprenticeship, also teaching at a boot camp, into what we were doing here at Branch while building out our apprenticeship program. And so what I found, to tie it back into this slide and where we are now, is that everybody has different ways of learning, and different ways where things click. For me, I was always a person who could uh, copy and paste something, get it to work, see patterns and things like pretty easily, and be able to get things to work as like a first step, and learn it. And then we'd have some people that really needed to kind of go deep early on to really understand not everything under the hood, but understand it on a more in-depth level, for it to click before they could move on. And so this was another reason why we wanted to have everybody to have a mentor and have these check-ins, because we knew people's learning styles were going to be different. And so you do have to account for that. And then obviously the last step here, step four, would be to hire these people in full time, which is what we did, and just continue to give them exposure to, working with a real team. This is the first dev team that they're on. So every habit they're going to learn is going to come from us. And so we want to make sure that we're producing good habits and exposing them to the right standards. So, what were the results from the boot camp? We saw real results that go back to earlier on when I said there were a lot of teams that I was on where um, you feel out of place. A lot of the teams that I was on when I first started, and even much further into my career, I may have been the only black engineer or the only person of color on the team, maybe in the department. And so these results were something that I'm very proud of, where we have 25% more black engineers than the industry average, 11% more women engineers than the industry average, 21% more Hispanic or Latino engineers in the industry average. And, like I mentioned earlier, we have multiple developers have grown with the team from, junior devs. We have like an associate dev, dev one, and numbered kind of devs, but they've grown essentially from what you would think of as junior or associate devs to senior devs from going through both of our programs. Let me see. I'll take these questions now. So, other than the technical assessment, so this is a question from Gabrielle. I really like this framework. Other than the technical assessment, what did you notice separated the interns who received a full-time offer and those who didn't? Yeah, that's a great question. I think outside of the technical assessment, the thing that made people assessment, well, not one thing, but I'll list them. Um, the first thing would be that they take feedback well. And so What that might mean different things for different people, but there's a couple examples I can think of right now off the top of my head. I would say take feedback well in terms of, hey, you're looking at this problem, the way you're solving it, you might get to an answer eventually, but there's a better way to do it. Why don't you try these steps? Sometimes there'll be people that were so determined that they could solve the problem their way and the way that they were thinking about it, they would just continue to go down their path, even after they gotten some advice to kind of go down a different way. And so, really, you can think about it as just like, not taking the right advice, essentially, would separate those who uh, did get an offer from those who didn't. I think another thing is just how well they are able to communicate and adapt. It can be hard, especially if before you had gotten a tech, you're used to positions where you were in person with other people, because we are a remote team. And so there, you might have a question that you'll send somebody in Slack, for instance, and they might get back to you an hour later. And so, how are you able to handle that asynchronous communication, and just learning how to handle that? And this isn't something that we expect people to just do right from the beginning, but something that, if it will work out ultimately, these are things that you learn over time. And then there's something else I think is more general but still applies here, that I found um in devs that kind of are self-taught or come from boot camps or things like this, is really trying to understand that point where you've hit a wall, or you can think about it as trying to understand that point of when is it the right time to ask a question. A lot of times, you'll hear different things on it, but it's like, hey, exhaust all your options before you go to a senior dev and ask them for help. Um, and I don't think that's necessarily the right way to think about it. It's not really exhaust every single option, but there is a point where you can go so far down the rabbit hole, or banging your head against the wall, where you're not going to get any further on this on your own. And so you have to learn what that point is, because it's not the same for everyone. And so, you kind of learn that through trial and error. And that's one of the pieces of advice I would give people, like, hey, pay attention to, like, it took you a little too long to ask a question here, because it looks like the way what you've been working on, you spent 2 extra days when you should have came and asked for help. Like, think about that point and try to remember that, so you know when to ask for help the next time. And then that works on the other side too. Anytime there's a little roadblock and you want to always ask for help, um, that could be a sign that you're not digging in enough. I don't know. That was a lot of different answers. Gabrielle, hopefully that hopefully that was helpful. But it could be really one of those things that kind of, lie on that spectrum as to why somebody ultimately wasn't a good fit. And it's constantly, like you said, obviously it's a technical skill, but it's like those soft skills and how they mesh with that, and really how are you communicating and collaborating with the team, and pulling and getting information from them, and kind of giving that information out. um all right, I'm gonna take another question because it just came in. Give me 1 second. um yeah, from Keon. Thanks for giving the session. How are you keeping your skills fresh in this ever-changing landscape? Are you reading a lot of books or putting in a lot of time to upskill after work hours and/or on weekends? Or does your company culture support exploration of newer technologies during the workday? Hey, great question. So yeah, I'll kind of talk about what I'm doing now versus what I did when I was like an IC, because I do actually spend some time in the code, even now in my role, but not like all the time. And so, short answer to your question, yes, we do have like a learning day, that we do once a month, where the whole day is like, go look at some new technologies, report back to the team how this could be helpful, or anything interesting you found, if it might not be helpful to the team. That's one thing. We do have a couple channels in Slack where we share kind of these thoughts of new technologies that we want to try out. I mean, right now, a big thing is AI. I know everybody knows that, but specifically using it in dev tools and to make the dev team more efficient. And so we're constantly kind of like evaluating different dev tools or AI dev tools right now and trying to stay up to date and like report back on those. And so we don't have a mandate or like a what's the right word here? Why can't I think of it? I don't know, but we don't have like a company mandate that's like everybody has to use um Cursor, or everybody has to use Claude Code, or everybody has to use like Codex or whatever it might be. But we do provide like budget for people to try different things, report back why one thing might be better than another, and continue to try out. Okay, and continue to try out other tools to help the team. And so that's how we do it. Now, when I was a dev, I was spending a lot of times on nights and weekends. Pre-COVID, I think one of the best ways was meetups. Like I was in a few different JavaScript meetups um in the area, and those are getting big again. I'm not in the rhythm of kind of like going how I was before. But I do think that was another good way to meet other people, connect with them, maybe work on projects with them too. But I did spend time after, some time after work and on weekends for sure, especially when I was in the apprenticeship program and just out, just trying to learn new things. And a lot of it, and people ask me, because I talk to a lot of more junior devs now or mentors or something. They're like, oh, what should I build to get better? And my thing is like, think of something that's interesting to you and start there and start trying to build that, whatever it might be. Now if it's your first kind of project, of course you should do something that connects to an API and the UI changes when it's supposed to, all of that. But assuming you're past that, I think just trying to work on something that's kind of a passion project to you, where you might not have a lot of clear direction but you're able to go and figure some things out. I think um that could be a good idea, for sure. All right. Let's. Okay. So, yeah, you saw the resort. I mean, you saw the results. And so what we learned from like this V2 of kind of building out this apprenticeship program and following through with it and doing the curriculum. So, the perfect candidate, like I said, there's not really, and this kind of goes into the answer I gave earlier. There's not really one thing that makes somebody the perfect candidate, right? There's a lot of things that go into it, and kind of how the different ingredients like fit together in that person um is what can make them a good or a bad candidate. But I will say it is very good to make sure you have kind of your um, roles and responsibilities laid out beforehand. I prefer like a matrix format that says like, hey, if you're a dev one, like you should be able to do these things across, the technical skill set, but then also like across the skill set that's not technical. So you have an idea already laid out and a definition of what does it look like to be successful in whatever role is there. So having it defined is important. So you do have to measure for it. But I found, in terms of a perfect candidate, I've worked, at a lot of different companies, either directly or even through consulting. And I found a lot of times, the kind of soft skills you get from people who transitioned into tech from some other role seem to be a lot, I don't want to say a lot better, but tend to be better than those who may just start in tech. And so that's one thing that, I look for too, in terms of how much of that do you need on your team. especially if they're interfacing and interacting with other teams. That kind of leads into some of the reasons why you might hire that way versus, right out of college. A culture fit is the people that you invest in. You know, I think, and this is just going, I guess, more into like the higher end side directly. But anybody here who's been on an interview, you'll have your interview that's a technical interview. If you're a dev, like super technical, but even for any other roles that say like, do you have the skill set? And then you'll have your interview that is like your culture fit interview. And a lot of times, your culture fit interview, you know, you'll find things that work, but that doesn't really tell you if they're gonna for sure be a culture fit. Um, after they start there. And so, like for a culture fit, you just have to still invest that time. It's not, this person's a culture fit at the beginning of the interview and there's no more work or investment that you need to make there. And so it's important, one, to have your culture defined again so you can measure against it, but to provide that feedback um, to people about how they're fitting into the culture and invest in that. What else I learned? Talent does grow faster than you think when it's supported. And so, we've had, I'm trying to think, I should have put this number here, but I'd say probably at least, uh, let me decrease the number. I'd say like 60% of our team probably are people who came from boot camp program or came through our apprenticeship program. So it's not that that's the only way we hire. We have hired people who are already experienced devs. But even then, some of the experienced devs that we've hired have either been self-taught or come through bootcamp programs. And we just found that even going through the interview process, they've just been the best fit for what we're doing. And it's always good, and this is even a note to myself to pay attention who isn't in a room. Again, when you're building a team, you want to build a team where everybody feels comfortable, where everybody's accepted, invited, everybody has an opportunity, however you want to think about it. Um, you can look at your team and see who isn't there and see if that's true or not. And so, this is a pathway to open up into that and to make that, those things more true, um, as a taking an avenue like this to build your teams. All right. All right, let me go through this in case there are any more questions. So, for me, like, how would I do this if I were going to try to build out this from scratch? Um, and I guess even if I'm going to build out a program like this without having that first version of it, is I would look to start small. One apprentice is a start. It is good to build structure, but very important, you have to keep room for flexibility. So that structure is there, I would say, as a guide for a program like this. But again, you have to account for different learning styles. The time that mentors have to actually do the mentoring. You just have to be flexible and allow for things to maybe be a little bit different than how you thought about it. At the beginning. It's important to think about mentorship not being an extra thing or an afterthought, but actually have it a part of your team culture, especially if you're doing something like this and you want your team building to work this way. And, again, like I said before, always consider who you might be overthinking. And so I've seen different programs like this. Um, when I worked at StockX, I think they had a program or they were starting one that was kind of internal apprenticeship program. So a program for people who wanted to get into software dev but come from a different department. I would say, depending on the size of your company, that could be a good way to start. And that could allow you to really start small as long as there's an understanding right between the departments that, what the time commitment is, and this is how it'll work. That's definitely a good way to do it. And if you had limited resources, it could be good to look at what if you have boot camps in your area, or any that you um any that you know where there are graduates who are like have kind of like the caliber you're looking for. That is another good place to start also. And so, the mentorship part, again, I think is really important. I've been big on mentorship, probably because I came in as an apprentice, throughout my whole career. And so I think also that's the best, a team that has a mentorship mindset is the best way for a junior dev to grow. And so you don't have to wait for perfect resumes, but you can be intentional. The ROI will be huge, if you start building proactively and just stop hiring reactively. And why does this matter? Well, representation matters, access matters. We don't want to just wait to fix the pipeline. Sometimes we can build programs or procedures that help build the on ramps ourselves. And that's what this work really is about. And so you don't have to, it's not about lowering the bar, right? Or whatever flavor of however they're trying to phrase it now. It's not about that. It's about opening the door, right? To people who have the doors closed in their faces. Great teams are built, not found. And so even if you do have this perfect engineer, or the 10x engineer, you're just trying to cherry pick them from all the resumes or LinkedIn or whatever, that might be one good engineer, but that doesn't make a good team. And so you still have to build the team either way. And when we invest in people in the right way, we'll build companies and cultures that reflect our values. And so, yeah, so thank you everyone for coming to the talk here. I appreciate it. I posted my LinkedIn um, at the top of the chat in the session chat. So feel free to connect with me. I'd be happy to connect with all of you there. And if there are any questions, we do have a couple more minutes. I'm happy to take them. Let's see. Let me check. Okay, I was just making sure we didn't have any more questions. But yeah, it doesn't look like we have any more questions. If you do, I'll stick. If you do have questions, I'll stick around for a few minutes. I know we're done at 3:45, so we'll end a couple minutes early here. I'll stick around till the end of time in case a question does come through. But again, thank you so much. I appreciate being able to present this to you. And yeah, thanks for having me. Have a great day, everyone. Oh, hey, yeah, Desmond. This was a apprenticeship program at Branch Insurance. So this is a company that I'm VP of engineering at. Uh, Connect with me on LinkedIn. We don't have one scheduled just yet, but yeah, I can let you know when we do, when we open it up. And my yeah, LinkedIn is at the top of the chat. If you didn't see it, but yeah, connect with me there, and I can connect you connect you with it when we open it up again. All right. It was 3:45. So yeah, everybody have a great day. Yeah, feel free if any questions or anything. I'm happy to again connect on LinkedIn, answer any questions you have. So reach out. Thank you again, everybody.